While they ate, I cleaned. While they slept, I scrubbed. 6 years, same floor, same bucket, same silence. They thought I was invisible. I was watching. They said I was part of the family. Families eat together. I cooked the food. I served the plates. I ate later. After the dishes. After the laughter. After everyone forgot I was in the house. That's when I was allowed to eat. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. One look, and I remembered my place. The alarm never had to wake her. Adaeze's body had learned, the way bodies learn things they were never supposed to have to. Through repetition, through consequence, through the particular kind of alertness that belongs to people who cannot afford to be caught sleeping. By 4:58 every morning, she was already awake, already listening to the house breathe around her, already calculating. She dressed in the dark, grey shirt, the one with the small tear at the left shoulder she had sewn back 3 times. Denim shorts that had faded from blue to almost nothing. She did not turn on the light. Her room, if the word room could be used generously for a space that held a mattress, a plastic chair, and a window that faced a concrete wall, sat at the far end of the ground floor, behind the kitchen, nowhere the smell of last night's cooking settled and stayed. She found the bucket by feel, filled it without letting the tap run too loud. The living room was cathedral quiet at this hour. Gold caught the earliest grey light through the curtains. The trim of the coffee table, the legs of the display cabinet, the frames on the wall holding portraits of a family that did not include her face. The marble floor stretched wide and pale, and it was beautiful, she supposed, the way things you must care for but cannot own are sometimes beautiful. A distant, aching kind of beauty. She started at the far corner the way she always did. Cloth folded twice, pressure even, no splashing. The trick was the sound, or the absence of it. She had learned at 11 that the wet drag of cloth across marble carried further than she expected. And she had learned this the way she learned most things in this house. Not through instruction, but through the specific silence that preceded Madame Chisholm's footsteps. That silence had a texture. It was different from ordinary quiet. It had a tension in it. So Adaeze moved without sound, knees on cold stone, cloth turning grey with water working outward from the corner in slow arcs. The room accumulated its details around her as the light shifted, the 2 glasses left on the coffee table from the night before, lip prints still visible on the rim. A throw pillow on the floor that had fallen from the sofa, a single gold earring on the side table, the back missing, placed there to be remembered and likely already forgotten. She picked up the earring, set it on the tray beside the remote controls. Tabena's sneakers were in the middle of the corridor again. Size 12, white deliberately, expensively so. She moved them to the side without looking up, the way you move furniture you have no feeling about, and kept walking toward the kitchen with the grey water bucket. Upstairs, nothing stirred. It wouldn't. Not for hours. Kamsiona had come in past midnight. Adaeze had heard the front door, heard her voice bright and careless, with the particular energy of someone who has never once had to calculate anything. Tabena's music had been a low pulse through the ceiling until nearly 2 a.m. They slept the sleep of people for whom mornings are optional. Adaeze emptied the bucket, refilled it, came back. She was on her second pass, the area beneath the coffee table, where crumbs from last night's pastries had scattered between the legs. When she heard the sound at the top of the stairs, not footsteps yet, just the small particular creak of the 3rd step from the top, which only made that sound under Madame Chisholm's weight, and which Adaeze's nervous system had catalogued years ago without being asked to. She straightened her cloth. Changed nothing else. There was nothing to change. Chisholm descended slowly, the way she did everything, with the unhurried certainty of someone who has never needed to rush because the world had always waited. She was dressed already, fully. Blouse pressed, earrings in, the specific kind of composed that requires effort and refuses to show it. One hand trailed the staircase railing. Her eyes moved across the room the way a hand moves over a surface, checking for imperfection. They found it. You used the microfiber cloth on the table. Adaeze looked up. Chisholm was standing at the base of the stairs, arms not yet folded, which was somehow worse, like the verdict hadn't been delivered but was already written. The glass surfaces need the chamois. How many times? It wasn't a question. It had stopped being a question a long time ago. I forgot, Adaeze said. Her voice came out level. She had practiced level. Chisholm looked at her for a moment, not with anger exactly, but with something quieter and more durable than anger. Disappointment performed so consistently it had become architectural, load-bearing, the thing the whole arrangement rested on. Wash both tables again, and you will not eat before the afternoon. She walked toward the kitchen. Adaeze did not watch her go. She looked down at the cloth in her hand, the wrong cloth damp with clean water, entirely ordinary. And she pressed it flat against the marble and began again. From upstairs, through the ceiling, she could hear the soft sound of Kamsiona shifting in her sleep. Outside, the sun was only just deciding to rise. By 10 o'clock, the house had transformed. Not physically. The marble was already clean, the gold already gleaming, the throw pillows already returned to their precise angles on the velvet sofa. That part had been Adaeze's work since before sunrise. What changed at 10 o'clock was the atmosphere, the way a stage changes when the audience begins to arrive. Lights up, postures adjusted, voices calibrated to a warmer frequency. Madam Chisholm had a visitor coming. Adaeze knew this the way she knew most things in the house, not because anyone told her, but because of the signs. The good china had been specified at breakfast. The small chafing dish had been brought out from the cabinet that only opened for company, and Chisholm had changed her blouse twice before 9, which meant the visitor was someone whose opinion carried weight and whose impression needed to be managed with care. Mrs. Okafor arrived at 10:17, wide and warm, and trailing the particular energy of a woman who considers herself a blessing to every room she enters. She was the kind of neighbour who remembered birthdays and forgot boundaries in equal measure, and she had known Chisholm since before Adaeze came to live here, which meant she had known a version of this house that Adaeze had never seen. Chisholm, my darling. The embrace at the door was genuine on one side and precisely calibrated on the other. You look rested. What are you using on your skin? Chisholm laughed, the full laugh, the one with warmth in it that Adaeze almost never heard directed at her. Come inside, come inside. Adaeze, bring the zobo and the small chops. The way she said it was effortless, not a command, in that company. Just a name and a task, delivered in the same register as you might say the weather is nice today. Mrs. Okafor didn't look toward the kitchen. There was nothing to look at. Adaeze arranged the tray slowly, listening. Through the kitchen doorway, the living room was a frame. Chisholm and Mrs. Okafor settled across from each other, the gold coffee table between them, afternoon light falling just right. Kamsiona had come downstairs by now, dressed in a way that suggested she had been awake longer than she appeared, and had arranged herself on the sofa arm with the unconscious ease of someone who understood she was decorative in this context and did not mind. Tobena had not come down. This was unremarkable. She is doing so well, Mrs. Okafor was saying, nodding at Kamsiona with approval. You are raising them beautifully. All of them. A slight pause, generous in its intention. Including the girl. Chisholm received this with a small, tired smile, the smile of a woman carrying something noble at great personal cost. What can I do? She is her father's child. I made a promise. God will reward you. Mrs. Okafor said it with the certainty of someone writing the check on God's behalf. Adaeze walked in with the tray. She set it down without sound. To place the zobo within reach, arranged the small chops the way she had been taught. Cloth napkin, cocktail sticks fanned outward. She was aware of Mrs. Okafor watching her with the benevolent attention people give to animals that perform something unexpectedly well. Adaeze. Mrs. Okafor's voice had sweetness in it that felt like being patted on the head. You have grown so tall. Are you still in school? Yes, Ma. Good girl. You are lucky to have Mama Chisholm. She used the honorific with complete comfort as though it had always existed, as though Adaeze had consented to it. Adaeze looked at the tray. Thank you, Ma. She felt Chisholm's eyes on the side of her face, not hostile in this moment, but watchful, monitoring, making sure the surface held. She helps so much around the house, Chisholm said warmly to Mrs. Okafor. I not to Adaeze. I don't know what I would do without her, honestly. She's a good girl. Kamziona reached for a small chop without looking up from her phone. Back in the kitchen, Adaeze stood at the sink with the tap running and did not wash anything. She stood there and looked at the water moving over her hands and thought about the word, lucky, the weight of it, the architecture of it, how it required her to have been in danger first, to have needed saving, so that what was done to her could be reframed as rescue. She was not angry. That was the complicated part. She had been angry once, and it had lived in her chest like something with teeth, and it had not changed anything. What she felt now was quieter and more precise. It was the feeling of watching a very convincing performance and being the only person in the room who had read the script. From the living room, laughter rose and settled. Mrs. Okafor was saying something about her son's new job. Chisholm was responding with interest. The sounds were warm and domestic and entirely real to everyone producing them. Adaeze turned off the tap. She dried her hands on her shirt, not the dish towel, which was for the kitchen, and not the hand towel near the sink, which was for guests. Her shirt, the grey one, the one with the sewn shoulder. She looked at the kitchen window, small, high, facing the side of the house. No view of the street, no view of the neighbours, no view of anything that might look back. She thought, not for the first time, and not yet with any plan attached to it. She simply thought, nobody out there knows. The laughter in the next room continued, uncomplicated and bright. And something in Adaeze, small and not yet named, turned over quietly in the dark. It started because of 17%. That was the battery level on Adaeze's phone when she plugged it in beside the bucket Thursday morning. The charging cable snaking from the wall socket near the display cabinet, the phone propped face up against the baseboard, screen dimming to save what little it had left. She had meant to leave it in her room. She had forgotten, the way you forget small things when your mind is already running the morning's checklist before your body has caught up. The phone was not important. It was a thing she owned the way she owned the grey shirt. Functionally, barely, without ceremony. A cracked screen she had learned to read around. A camera that took photographs with a slight tilt to the left that she had stopped trying to correct. She left it and started on the corridor. The morning had been unremarkable in the way that preceded most things that mattered. Tobena had come downstairs earlier than usual, which had surprised her. He was in the kitchen eating cereal before 9, standing at the counter rather than sitting, scrolling his phone with one hand and lifting the spoon with the other. He hadn't spoken to her. She hadn't expected him to. But when she moved past him to reach the cleaning cabinet, he stepped aside without being asked. And there was something in that small, thoughtless courtesy that stayed with her longer than it should have. She was thinking about it still, the automatic step aside, the question of whether it meant anything at all, when she heard Chisholm's footsteps on the stairs. She was in the corridor outside the living room, chamois cloth in hand this time, working along the baseboard of the display cabinet. The phone was behind her, 6 feet away, forgotten against the wall. The cable pulled slightly as Chisholm passed it without looking down. What is that on the floor? Adaeze turned. Chisholm was pointing, not at the cable but at a faint watermark near the cabinet leg, a pale ring the size of a coin. left likely from last night when Kamsiona had set a glass on the floor and no one had mentioned it, to Adaeze. I haven't reached that side yet, Ma. It's 10 o'clock. I started from the far end. I'm working toward... I'm not interested in your process. Chisholm's voice had not risen. It never needed to. It held a particular flatness that was somehow more final than volume. The sound of a door closing in a room where you were hoping to stay. This floor should be finished before the household wakes. That has always been the standard. Adaeze looked at the watermark. The household had woken early today, without pattern, without warning. She had adjusted her route accordingly. She did not say this. I'll do it now, Ma. You'll do it now. A pause. And the cabinet glass has fingerprints on it. How are you cleaning and leaving fingerprints? I'll redo it. Chisholm looked at her for a long moment, the particular look that never quite resolved into anything actionable, that lived in the space between accusation and verdict. Then she looked at the corridor generally, the way a person looks at a thing they own and find consistently disappointing. I don't ask for much, she said, more to the corridor than to Adaeze. I ask for the basics. Consistency. Attention. A slight adjustment of her wrap. Your father was a detail man. It skips generations, apparently. She walked back toward the kitchen. Adaeze stood with the chamois cloth in her hand and did not move for a moment. The reference to her father was not new. Chisholm used it occasionally, not as cruelty exactly, but as calibration. A reminder of lineage, of debt, of the specific nature of Adaeze's presence in this house and what it was built on. It landed the same way it always did, somewhere beneath the ribs, in a place she had learned not to press. She turned back to the watermark. Behind her, the phone screen had been dark for several minutes. She did not know it was recording. She found it that night. She had nearly missed it entirely. The file was listed without a thumbnail, just a timestamp and a duration. 4 minutes, 31 seconds. She almost deleted it without opening it, assuming it was another accidental pocket recording, static and footsteps. She pressed play. The angle was low and slightly tilted left, which was how her camera always was. The baseboard filled the bottom third of the frame, the cabinet leg, the pale watermark on the marble. And then, Adaeze herself, from behind and slightly to the side, kneeling with the chamois cloth, shoulders drawn inward in that particular way she never noticed until now. She watched herself turn when Chisholm's voice entered the frame. She watched herself make herself small, not dramatically, not cowering, nothing that would read obviously on a face. It was subtler than that. A slight lowering of the chin, a closing of the posture, the careful, practiced neutrality of someone who has learned that any expression with too much feeling in it becomes a liability. She watched the whole 4 minutes and 31 seconds. Then she watched it again. The delete button sat at the bottom of the screen. She looked at it for a long time, long enough that the screen dimmed once and she touched it to bring it back. Nobody out there knows. She had thought that yesterday, standing at the kitchen window with clean hands and no plan. She pressed the lock button instead, lay back on the mattress in the dark, held the phone against her chest. Outside her small window, the concrete wall was the same as it always was, blank and close and going nowhere. She did not sleep for a long time. She did not decide all at once. That was the thing she would remember later, that it did not feel like a decision so much as a series of small ones, each one barely larger than the last, the way water finds a path not through force but through persistence and the patient reading of surfaces. The first intentional recording happened on a Saturday. She had spent 2 days thinking about angles, not obsessively. She did not have the luxury of obsession, which required uninterrupted time and a mind not already allocated to other tasks. She thought about it in the spaces the house allowed, the 3 minutes between finishing the corridor and starting the kitchen, the 40 seconds it took for the kettle to boil. The particular quiet of her room after the household sounds had settled past midnight. She thought about what the camera had caught accidentally and what it had missed. She thought about the tilt. On Saturday morning, she tested 3 positions before anyone woke. The bucket could hold the phone upright against its inner wall at an angle that looked like nothing. A forgotten object. A mundane detail. The cable was the problem. There was no outlet close enough to the center of the living room, which meant battery management was the real architecture of the system. She would need to record in shorter windows, conserve charge, be precise about timing. She created the email account on a Tuesday, using the school library computer during the 30-minute window she was permitted. A name that meant nothing. A password she constructed from her mother's birthday. Not Chisholm, her actual mother, whose face she still carried in a specific quality of afternoon light. She tested the cloud backup twice before she trusted it. Then she moved the original file, 4 minutes, 31 seconds, the accident, and felt something shift in her chest that she could not name precisely. Not relief. Something more structural than relief. Like a load-bearing wall appearing in a house she had not known needed one. The system developed its own logic over the following days. She learned that Chisholm's pattern was consistent between 7 and 9 in the morning, the window of highest activity, highest unpredictability, highest likelihood of an incident. She learned that the bucket position worked best near the display cabinet, worse near the dining table where the angle caught only legs and shadow. She learned to check battery at 5 a.m. before anything else, the way she had once learned to check the sound of the third stair. She was careful, more careful than she had ever been about anything. And she had always been careful. The close calls came anyway. The first was a Wednesday. Tobena came downstairs without the warning of his usual music. She had grown to rely on that low pulse through the ceiling as a 1-minute alert. That morning there was silence, and then he was simply there, in the corridor doorway, still in his sleeping clothes, rubbing his face with the heel of his hand. He stopped when he saw the bucket. His eyes moved to the phone propped against it, cable trailing to the wall, screen dark. Adaeze was on her knees 2 meters away, our cloth in hand, watching him in her peripheral vision with a stillness she hoped read as indifference. He looked at the phone for 3 full seconds. She counted them. Then he looked at her. "Is that plugged into the living room socket?" "Yes. My room socket is faulty." This was true. She had made sure it was true 4 days earlier. He seemed to process this without particular interest. "The extension in the kitchen has space. I didn't want to be in the way while breakfast was being made." He looked at the phone once more. Something moved across his face. Not suspicion exactly. More like a question he almost formed and then decided wasn't worth the energy. He walked past her toward the kitchen. She heard the refrigerator open. She did not release her breath audibly. The second time was Kamsiona, and it was different in a way that stayed with Adaeze longer than she expected. It was a Friday afternoon. Adaeze was returning the phone to her pocket after uploading the morning's file, standing in the corridor, the upload complete, the motion practiced, and quick. She turned and Kamsiona was at the top of the stairs looking down, not at the phone, at Adaeze's face. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but there was something in Kamsiona's expression that did not match her usual register. Not boredom, not the ambient entitlement that generally occupied her features. Something closer to recognition, or the edge of it. Adaeze held her eyes without meaning to, waiting. Kamsiona came down the stairs, one hand on the railing. When she reached the bottom, she paused, close enough that Adaeze could smell her perfume. Expensive. Defloral, the same one that lived in the bathroom Adaeze was not permitted to use. "You look tired," Kamsiona said. Not unkindly. Adaeze said nothing for a moment. The observation felt strange in her mouth before she had even responded to it. Not because it was false, but because Kamsiona had never looked closely enough before to notice. "I'm fine," Adaeze said. Kamsiona studied her for 1 more second, and Adaeze felt it, the precise moment when something that might have opened instead closed. A small internal decision, visible only in the way Kamsiona's gaze softened back into distance. the way she adjusted the strap of her bag and moved her attention forward. "Tell my mum I've gone to Zara's," she said and walked out the front door. The door clicked shut behind her. Adaeze stood in the corridor and looked at the space Kamsiona had just occupied. The perfume was still there, settling slowly into the air. She thought about the expression on the stairs, that brief, almost arriving thing, and felt something she could not quite categorize. Not gratitude that Kamsiona had said nothing, not relief, something more complicated. The particular weight of being almost seen by someone who then decided, quietly and without malice, that it was easier not to look. She put the phone in her pocket. Upstairs, the house was silent. Chisholm's bedroom door was closed. The archive was growing, file by file, backed up and nameless in the cloud, and nobody in this house knew. The problem was that Adaeze was beginning to understand that knowing and acting were two entirely different rooms. And she was still only standing in the doorway of the first one. There was a particular quality to the week before Uncle Emeka's visit that Adaeze could not have explained, but felt in her body the way you feel a change in pressure before rain. Nothing specific, nothing she could point to. Just Chisholm moving through the house with a slightly shorter radius, decisions made faster, corrections delivered with less preamble, the temperature of ordinary moments dropping by a degree that only Adaeze seemed to register. Kamsiona noticed nothing. Tobena was present in the house the way furniture is present, occupying space without participating in atmosphere. The household ran as it always ran, and if the engine was running hotter than usual, Adaeze was the only one close enough to the mechanism to feel it. She adjusted her system accordingly. Shorter recordings, more frequent. Battery always above 60% before 7 a.m. She had developed a secondary position. The phone angled inside the cabinet beside the kitchen entrance, face obscured behind a small decorative bowl that nobody ever moved. She had tested the audio quality 3 times. It was adequate. She was ready before she knew for what. Uncle Emeka arrived on a Thursday afternoon with a driver and 2 bags and the expansive energy of a man who considered his presence a gift to any room. He was Chisholm's older brother, broader, louder, with a laugh that came from somewhere genuinely warm, which made him more complicated to read than most people in Adaeze's life. He had visited twice before in the years she had lived here. At both times he had been kind to her in a surface way, the way people are kind to things they notice only briefly. Chisholm received him in the living room with the good china already set, Kamsiona downstairs and dressed, Tobena summoned from his room with a specificity of tone that brooked no delay. The household had been rearranged around his arrival with the same invisible labour it was always rearranged around. Adaeze had spent the morning polishing surfaces that were already clean, pressing a tablecloth that had no wrinkles, arranging a fruit bowl with a geometric precision Chisholm demonstrated once and expected replicated exactly. She served the drinks and retreated toward the kitchen. "Wait." Uncle Emeka's voice, easy and large. "Is this Adaeze? Come, let me look at you." She stopped, turned. He was leaning forward in the armchair, studying her with the open assessment of someone who has no idea his attention might be complicated to receive. "You've grown. How old are you now?" 17, sir." 17. He nodded, satisfied. "And school? What class? What are you studying?" The question arrived simply, genuinely. He wanted to know. Adaeze opened her mouth. "She's in SS2. Chisholm's voice came in clean and smooth, not rushing, not overlapping, arriving in exactly the space between the question and Adaeze's answer, filling it so naturally that only someone watching for it would notice the replacement. "She's managing. The sciences are a challenge, but we're working on it." "We." The word sat in the room. Uncle Emeka nodded again, looking at Chisholm now, the conversational current redirected without friction. "Good, good. Education is everything." He reached for his drink. "Make sure she has what she needs." "Of course." Chisholm said. "She's my responsibility." Adaeze looked at a point slightly above Uncle Emeka's shoulder and held her expression in the careful neutral she had spent years calibrating. She was aware of Kamsiona on the sofa peripherally. Aware without looking that Kamsiona had glanced at her in that moment and then looked away, choosing the same direction her eyes had found on the staircase 3 weeks ago. "You can go," Chisholm said to Adaeze, pleasantly. She went. The punishment came after Uncle Emeka retired to the guest room for his afternoon rest. Chisholm found her in the kitchen and closed the door, which was the detail that distinguished a correction from an ordinary reprimand. The closed door meant what followed was not for the household to hear. Not because it was more severe, but because what happened behind closed doors carried no witnesses and therefore no version except Chisholm's. "What were you doing?" Adaeze looked up from the sink. "Ma? When my brother asked you that question, what were you doing with your face?" She kept her voice level. "I don't understand." "You were performing." Chisholm's tone was not raised, it was precise. "Looking at him like a child who has been waiting to be noticed. You embarrassed me." The accusation was so clean, so fully formed, that for a moment Adaeze simply stood with it. She had said almost nothing. She had stood, answered her age, and been spoken over. The performance Chisholm was describing had occurred entirely in the space of Adaeze existing visibly in front of a person who had asked her a direct question. "I wasn't performing, Ma." "Don't explain yourself to me in that tone." Chisholm moved to the counter, adjusted something that did not need adjusting. "You will not eat dinner at the table tonight. You'll eat after. And next time my family is in this house, you remember your position." She left. Adaeze turned back to the sink. The water was still running. She turned it off. Her position. She thought about that word with her hands resting on the edge of the sink, wet and still. She thought about how a word like that could be used as a wall and a sentence simultaneously. Then she dried her hands, walked to the cabinet beside the kitchen entrance, retrieved the phone from behind the decorative bowl. She checked the recording. Audio was clear. Every word. She uploaded it without looking at the screen, the motion fluid now, practiced, her hands entirely steady. That steadiness was something she had not planned for and had not noticed accumulating. It had arrived the way the archive had arrived, incrementally, file by file, through the patient logic of having no other available option. She put the phone in her pocket. From the guest room came the distant sound of Uncle Emeka laughing at something on his television. A warm sound. A sound from another world that existed 3 walls away and might as well have been 3 countries. Adaeze looked at the kitchen window. The concrete wall outside was the same as always. She thought about her position. Then she thought about the archive, growing quietly in a cloud under a name that belonged to no one in this house. And she understood, with a calm that should perhaps have frightened her but didn't, that position was only permanent if you accepted the terms under which it had been assigned. She had not decided anything yet, but her hands were steady, and that, for now, was enough. The water dispenser arrived on a Friday. It was large, a tall, freestanding unit in brushed steel that Chisholm had ordered for the upstairs hallway, replacing the smaller one outside the kitchen that had served the household adequately for 3 years. The delivery men had brought it as far as the front door and no further, which was their policy, which Chisholm accepted with a smile while they were present and addressed with a different register entirely once they had gone. "It needs to go upstairs." Adaeze looked at the unit. It was not assembled yet. The base and the body were separate, the water bottle still sealed in its wrapping, but even disassembled, the body of it was nearly her height and dense in a way that announced its weight before you touched it. She did not say anything. She found the trolley in the storeroom and brought it out and began working out the geometry of the staircase, the angle of the first landing, the width of the upper corridor, the number of steps and what each one would cost her. She had learned to solve these problems privately and completely before beginning. Because beginning without a solution and then struggling was the version that attracted commentary. She was tightening the strap around the base when she became aware of Tobena. He was on the sofa in his usual position, legs stretched across the cushions, phone above his face, the particular horizontal arrangement of a person who has never once considered whether a surface was meant for him. He had been there when the delivery arrived. He had watched the men bring it in. He was watching now. Adaeze worked the trolley into position, tilted the base back. The weight shifted into her and she absorbed it with her legs the way she had learned, adjusting her grip. She got it to the first step. The staircase was not forgiving. Each step required the trolley to be lifted slightly before it could be rolled, and the base kept wanting to slide off the platform at the angle required to clear the banister. She moved slowly. Her arms were burning by the fourth step. She stopped, readjusted, kept going. She was on the seventh step when she heard the sofa. Not footsteps, just the sound of the cushions releasing weight, the small domestic sound of someone getting up. She did not look back. She focused on the step, on the strap, on the wall she could use for leverage if she needed it. Tobena appeared at the base of the stairs. He stood there with his phone in his hand and said nothing. She could feel him watching. The quality of the silence was different from his usual indifference. It had something uncertain in it, something without its characteristic ease. He did not offer to help, but he did not look at his phone either. He stood at the bottom of the stairs and watched her carry his mother's water dispenser up step by step, and whatever he was feeling moved across his face in a way he either couldn't control or hadn't yet learned to hide. Adaeze reached the landing, set the trolley down, rolled it to the wall. She looked back once without meaning to. Tobena was still standing there. When their eyes met, he looked down at his phone, not quickly, not guiltily, but with the deliberate redirection of someone buying themselves a moment to decide something. Then he walked back to the sofa and sat down. She went back for the body of the unit. He did not get up again. Kamsiona came home at 4 in the kind of mood that had weather in it. Adaeze knew it before she heard the front door. She heard the car outside. Heard the particular compression of a door closed with too much intention. Heard the shoes on the entrance tiles. She moved to the kitchen on instinct, the way you move away from the edge of something without consciously deciding to. She was not fast enough. Adaeze! Kamsiona appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her going-out clothes, one earring already removed and held in her fist. Did you touch my navy blazer? No. It was on my chair this morning and now it's not. I didn't go into your room today. Then where is it? Not a question. The same flattened syntax Chisholm used, delivered in a voice that was learning its shape. Adaeze turned from the counter to face her. I don't know. Kamsiona stared at her. Something was moving underneath the irritation. Adaeze could see it the way she had learned to see things in this house, in the layer below the presented surface. Kamsiona's jaw was tight in a way that had nothing to do with a blazer. Her eyes were slightly too bright. Whatever had happened today had happened somewhere outside this house, and it had come home looking for a place to land. Everything disappears in this house, Kamsiona said to the kitchen generally. It's impossible. She turned and went upstairs. Adaeze stood still for a moment. Then she heard from the upstairs corridor the sound of a wardrobe being opened, and then, 10 seconds later, no sound that followed the specific quality of finding what you were looking for. A door closed, not gently. The blazer had not been lost. Adaeze knew this because she knew where everything in this house was. It was on the hook behind Kamsiona's bathroom door, where Kamsiona herself had put it 2 days ago. She had seen it there yesterday when she went in to clean. She had not been asked where to look. She had been accused. She did not go upstairs to say anything. That evening, Chisholm received 4 guests in the living room. Women from her church auxiliary, arriving in a cloud of perfume and coordinated fabric, filling the gold-trimmed space with the particular social energy of people who are performing relaxation. Adaeze served, cleared, refilled, and moved around the edges of the gathering like weather around a structure. Chisholm was luminous, poised, warm, telling a story that made everyone laugh at the right moment. She touched her guests on the arm. She asked about children, about husbands, about projects. The room loved her. Adaeze set a fresh bowl of small chops on the coffee table and straightened up. For a fraction of a second, she was standing at full height in the centre of the room, and she caught her own reflection in the dark glass of the display cabinet across the way. A girl in a grey shirt, straight-backed, watching. Then she stepped back to the edges again, and the moment closed. Later, when the guests had gone and the house was settling into its nighttime sounds, Adaeze retrieved the phone from its position beside the cabinet. The evening's recording was 43 minutes long. She uploaded it without reviewing it. Then she sat on her mattress in the dark and thought about Tabena standing at the bottom of the stairs holding his phone, and not helping and not laughing. She could not decide which of those two things meant more. She was still thinking about it when she finally slept. The gathering was called a celebration. Chisholm had used that word specifically, celebration, when she told Adaeze on Thursday morning what would be needed by Saturday afternoon. The good china again. The crystal glasses from the cabinet that required individual polishing. The chafing dishes, both of them. Flowers arranged in the gold vase by the entrance, not the ceramic one. A platter of small chops, a platter of puff-puff, the zobo cold, and the chapman ready to be mixed. The sitting room set for 14. Adaeze had written nothing down. She never needed to. She held the list in the part of her mind she had learned to keep clear and organised. The part that had been trained through years of consequence to retain instructions perfectly. She spent Friday evening preparing what she could. Saturday morning she was up at 4:30. The guests began arriving at 2. They came in the way Chisholm's gatherings always assembled, in a slow accumulation of colour and sound, the living room filling incrementally until it had reached that specific density where the gold and the laughter and the perfume became their own atmosphere. Business associates, churchwomen, 2 of Chisholm's cousins who visited occasionally and always left with something, a food parcel, a gift, the particular currency of Chisholm's generosity that kept her social architecture intact. Adaeze moved through the edges of it, tray in, tray out, glasses refilled before they were empty. The small invisible mathematics of service that required anticipation rather than reaction, reading the room from its periphery so precisely that your presence registered only as comfort and never as a person. She had placed the phone that morning in a new position, behind the flower arrangement on the entrance table, angled toward the sitting room. The audio she knew from testing was clear across the full length of the space. She had checked the battery at 4 a.m., 89%. She was carrying the platter of puff-puff from the kitchen when she heard Chisholm's voice find a different register. Not louder, sharper, the way a blade is sharper than a wall. Not larger, just more precise. Adaeze? She came through from the kitchen. 14 faces in the room, some turning, some not. Chisholm was standing near the centre, all beside the coffee table, in a dress the colour of burned amber, her posture the specific architecture of a woman performing displeasure for an audience she trusted to side with her. "What is this?" Chisholm gestured at the coffee table. Adaeze looked. The drinks tray was there, the glasses aligned, the coasters placed correctly. She looked for the error and found nothing. The chapman was supposed to be pre-mixed. I told you pre-mixed. She had said cold and ready to be mixed. Adaeze knew this with the certainty of someone who had no room in their life for imprecision. She had reviewed it twice. She was not wrong. She did not say this. "I'll fix it," she said. "Fix it now. In front of my guests, I'm serving unmixed drinks." Chisholm's tone had taken on that quality. The benevolent exhaustion. But the performance of a woman managing something that perpetually disappointed her. Around the room, faces arranged themselves, some sympathetic toward Chisholm, some simply waiting to see what happened next. One of the cousins reached for a puff-puff. Adaeze took the tray. She carried it to the kitchen, mixed the Chapman, carried it back. She set the tray on the coffee table, straightened up, reached for the platter to move it slightly left, which was where it had been before she'd adjusted it to accommodate the tray. Leave it, Chisholm, still performing. You've done enough adjusting for one afternoon. Just stand there and let me look at the damage. Laughter, somewhere in the room. Not cruel laughter, the nervous social variety that fills a silence and takes the shape of whatever the room requires it to take. Adaeze stood with the tray in her hands, and the laughter settled around her like sediment, and something that had been loosening for weeks, quietly, incrementally, in the same way the archive had built, and the system had developed, and the steadiness had arrived in her hands. Released, not with heat, with clarity. She set the tray down on the coffee table, not loudly, with the same deliberate, even pressure she had used on marble floors for 6 years. She set it down and she straightened up for the last time in this room, and she looked directly at Chisholm. Not with anger, not with tears, with something far more structural than either. And she said, "I've been recording for 3 weeks. 7 words." The room did not react loudly. That was the thing she would remember, that the silence arrived before anyone had time to manufacture a response. A real silence. The kind that meant the air in the room had changed and every person in it had felt it simultaneously. Chisholm's face went through several expressions in the space of 2 seconds. None of them were the ones she used for performance. These were private expressions, the kind that lived behind the composed surface. And watching them move across Chisholm's face in front of 14 witnesses was, Adaeze understood, the most honest thing that had happened in this house in 6 years. "What did you say?" "Quiet. Very quiet." "I have recordings," Adaeze said. Her voice was level. Her hands at her sides were completely still. "From the last 3 weeks, audio and video, are backed up." She looked at the room once, at the 14 faces, at the cousins, at the church women, at the 2 people in Chisholm's social architecture who she knew from their expressions were already calculating. And then she looked at Chisholm one final time. "I'm leaving now." She walked to her room. She changed her shirt. She took the bag she had packed on Wednesday night, small, practical, containing what was actually hers and nothing borrowed. And she put the phone in her pocket, and she walked back through the house for the last time. The living room was audible from the corridor. Chisholm's voice lower now, reconstructing. A guest asking something, the sound of a social architecture being repaired in real time by a woman who had spent years perfecting that particular skill. Adaeze did not go back through the living room. She went through the kitchen, past the cabinet where the phone had first learned to watch, past the sink where she had stood with clean hands and a concrete wall for a view, past the bucket and the chamois cloth and the small decorative bowl that had hidden 3 weeks of truth, and she opened the back door. The daylight was ordinary. Not dramatic, not golden, not cinematic, just a Lagos Saturday afternoon. Warm, slightly overcast, the sound of a neighbour's generator. A dog somewhere. Traffic on the main road 2 streets over. The world had not arranged itself to receive her. It was simply there, indifferent and open, which was its own kind of welcome. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Behind her she heard Kamsiona's voice descending the stairs, asking something, not yet aware. And beneath it, just audible. Tobenna's television still running, unwatched. She thought about the staircase, the water dispenser, the 7 steps. The moment Tobenna had stood at the bottom holding his phone, not laughing, not helping, caught in the space between comfort and conscience, and how she had wondered, lying awake, which of those 2 absences meant more. She understood now that it did not matter. What mattered was that she had stopped waiting for someone else's discomfort to become her rescue. She stepped outside, the door closed behind her. Not slammed, not dramatic. The simple, definitive sound of a latch finding its catch. She walked to the front of the house and through the gate and onto the street. She did not look back. Not because looking back would have weakened her, She was past the point where this house had that power. But because there was nothing behind her now that required her attention. 6 years of cold marble and grey shirts and borrowed email accounts, and the patient, meticulous building of something Chisholm had never imagined she was capable of constructing. It was all in her pocket. Every morning she had spent on her knees, every meal eaten after, every question answered for her, every cloth used on the wrong surface, every reference to her position, every room gone quiet with the particular silence of people choosing not to see. All of it, documented, backed up, and entirely hers. She reached the end of the street and turned left, not because she knew exactly where she was going, but because left was forward, and forward was the only direction that had ever been available to her, and she was finally, completely walking in it without anyone else's permission. The afternoon held her, ordinary and open, warm and slightly overcast, not golden. Enough. Years later, when people asked how I left that house, I told them the simple version. I told them I gathered my things. I told them I walked out. I told them I had recordings. All of that was true. But what I never told anyone was what happened 3 weeks after I left. I was living in a small rented flat then. 1 window, 1 stove, 1 mattress that was actually mine. The first night I slept without listening for footsteps, I woke up at 4:58 a.m. anyway. Some habits don't dissolve, they calcify. One evening, I opened the archive again. Not because I needed proof, not because I was afraid, because I wanted to see who I had been. The videos were exactly as I remembered. The marble, the cloth, her voice. But when I reached the first file, the accidental one, the 4 minutes and 31 seconds, something was different. There was a sound I had never noticed before. Right after she says, "This floor should be finished before the household wakes," there is a pause. And in that pause, faint, almost beneath the audio, you can hear breathing. Not mine, not hers. Slow, steady, closer to the phone than either of us had been. I played it 3 times, then 5, then 10. The angle of that recording had always bothered me. The way it tilted slightly left, as if something had nudged it, but I had been alone in that corridor. I know I had been alone. I locked my phone and set it down. The room was quiet, no marble floors, no gold trim, just ordinary walls and an ordinary fan humming overhead. I told myself it was distortion, echo, compression artifacts. I slept anyway. The next morning at exactly 4:58 a.m., I woke up before my alarm. And for the first time since leaving that house, I heard it again. Not in a corridor, not in a recording, in my room, the same measured breathing, not angry, not rushed, just patient. I didn't move. I didn't panic, because I understood something then that I hadn't understood in that living room. Some houses don't create silence. They train you to hear it. And when you leave, you don't always leave alone. I don't know who was closest to the phone that morning 6 years ago. I don't know why the angle shifted. I don't know who or what was breathing in that pause. But I do know this. When you build an archive of a house, the house may build one of you. And sometimes, when you finally walk forward without permission, something walks with you. The marble was never the coldest surface in that home. It was the quiet. And quiet, once learned, never truly lets you go.